On the broadcast tonight, family reunion talks. South Korea proposes holding working-level talks with North Korea next week on holding further reunions for families separated by the 1950-53 Korean War. At China's annual Congress, Beijing says it will retain a growth target of 7.5% and raise its defense budget by 12.2%. And crisis in Ukraine. The tense high-stakes standoff between Ukraine and Russia continues, with both sides insisting they do not want war, but publicly offering little evidence of their willingness to budge. We'll have the latest. Early edition at 6 begins now.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 4 a.m. in Washington, 10 in Geneva, and 6 on a Wednesday evening here in Seoul. Good evening to you all. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Kwon-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us.
Now, South Korea's Foreign Minister Byung-se will address the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva today over the unresolved issue of comfort women, or those forced into sexual slavery during Japan's colonial rule of Korea.
This marks the first time that South Korea's top diplomat will be raising the issue at a UN Human Rights Council session. And for more, we are joined by our Hwang Sung-hee. Good evening, Sung-hee.
Good evening, guys. So in less than an hour, South Korean Foreign Minister Byung-se will give a speech where he will call on Japan to compensate the victims of its wartime sexual slavery. Now, this is the first time since 2006 that Seoul's top diplomat is attending the UN Human Rights Council session, and the first time ever that the comfort women issue is being raised. An estimated 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were used as sex slaves by the Japanese army in the early 20th century, and many are still waiting for a heartfelt apology from Tokyo. Minister Yoon had initially canceled his plans to attend the session, but Seoul's foreign ministry said he changed his mind at the last minute to show that Korea is serious about tackling the issue.
Now, Sung-hee, relations between Seoul and Tokyo have long been prickly, to say the least, because of this historical past and, of course, Japan's colonial period of Korea. But those tensions have more or less aggravated to another level under the leaderships of President Park Geun-hye here and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe there. Just exactly how toxic have they become?
Well, let's put it this way. It's been a year since President Park Geun-hye took office, and she has yet to sit down for summit talks with her Japanese counterpart. President Park has been critical of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for his nationalistic stance and his tendency to glorify Japan's World War II history rather than taking responsibility for the country's wartime crimes. Her latest warning came in a televised speech last Saturday. Let's take a look.
과거의 잘못을 돌아보지 못하면 새로운 시대를 열 수 없고, 과오를 인정하지 못하는 지도자는 새로운 미래를 열어갈 수 없다는 것은 당연한 이치일 것입니다.
The speech was made on the anniversary of the 1919 uprising in Korea against Japanese colonial rule, and also a day after Japan said it would review a landmark apology it issued in 1993 to the comfort women. The apology, dubbed the Kono Statement, after then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono, acknowledged for the first time that so-called comfort women were forced to serve in army brothels. But Tokyo said last week it would set up a panel to review the evidence on which that apology was based, with nationalist politicians in Japan calling the women's accounts a total lie.
And Washington is in the most prickly situation because they have a stake in all of this, Japan and Korea being two of its top allies there. And of course, Washington has been calling out to Seoul and Tokyo to mend ties.
That's right. The United States wants its two main allies in Northeast Asia to get along and has been voicing its concern over the rift between South Korea and Japan. At a congressional hearing on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, Daniel Russell, addressed the urgent need to show prudence and restraint in dealing with difficult historical issues, saying the issues must be handled in a way that promotes healing. Russell's comments are in line with remarks made by Secretary of State John Kerry during his visit to Seoul last month, where he urged Seoul and Tokyo to put history behind and work together to counter North Korea's nuclear threats and to counterbalance the growing influence of China.
And Sung-hee, I'm sure you will be covering the speech by Foreign Minister Byung-se yourself and give us the latest in our later newscast.
Of course.
All right, thank you, Sung-hee, for that.
Pleasure.
Now, Seoul's defense ministry lashed out at Pyongyang for its Tuesday missile launch, which is being seen as a sign of its apparent protest against an ongoing series of annual military drills by South Korea and the U.S. Arirang News Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry said Wednesday that the previous day's rocket launches were a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, as the North did not notify anyone of the event in advance, and the missiles jeopardized a commercial Chinese airliner flying through North Korean airspace.
This is a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and it has threatened the safety of a commercial airliner. Pyongyang should stop its provocations and abide by international standards.
Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok labeled the launches as explicit acts of aggression against a series of ongoing military exercises by South Korea and the U.S., adding that Seoul is keeping a close watch on the possibility of additional provocations to come. The missiles were short-range KN-02 ballistic missiles, and military sources in South Korea said Wednesday the North has around 100 of the missiles in its arsenal. The missiles can load up to 400 kilograms of explosives and chemical weapons, and dozens of missiles can be launched in minutes. The KN-02 has a maximum range of 170 kilometers and can hit a target at that distance in less than 4 minutes, posing a huge threat to the Seoul metropolitan area. It is thought that 30 KN-02 missiles are mounted on mobile launch pads and have Seoul in their crosshairs. North Korea has recently developed a multiple rocket launcher called the KN-09, which is presumed to have a target distance of 200 kilometers. That means that missiles shot from the border could reach Kaesongdae, where the joint military bases of South Korea's Army, Air Force, and Navy headquarters are located. The Pentagon said Tuesday in its latest strategy document that North Korea poses a growing threat to the United States because of its pursuit of long-range missiles and nuclear weapons development. The U.S. Defense Department said the U.S. military will keep up its investment in missile defense while maintaining a major presence in the region. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, Seoul's push to have regular reunions for families separated by the Korean War has now come in writing. South Korea made a proposal to the North on this Wednesday, asking for talks over the urgent humanitarian issue. But as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, the early speculation is that Pyongyang will turn down that offer.
Seoul's Unification Ministry sent a written proposal to Pyongyang on Wednesday, suggesting that the two Koreas hold talks on making reunions for families separated by the Korean War a regular event. Deputy spokesperson Park Soo-jin said the ministry proposed holding a round of working-level Red Cross talks next Wednesday on the South Korean side of Panmunjom, which is located on the de facto border between the two Koreas. The offer follows President Park Geun-hye's call for regular family reunions during a speech on March 1st, where she pointed out that tens of thousands of South Koreans remain on a waiting list to see their long-lost loved ones in the North. The last round of reunions 2 weeks ago were the first in more than 3 years. Pyongyang has yet to respond to Seoul's proposal. Local media outlets in Seoul say Pyongyang is likely to reject the offer and instead make a counter-proposal for working-level talks, where other unresolved cross-border issues could be discussed, such as a resumption of tours to the North Mount Kungang Resort and the lifting of economic sanctions on North Korea. Experts say Pyongyang is likely to respond to Seoul's proposal after joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington, which ends on Thursday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The tensions in Ukraine remain high, with Russia and the West at odds over what's happened and what should happen next.
But at least they're beginning to talk face-to-face about the standoff. 2 separate meetings between Russia and Western officials will be taking place on Wednesday. Our Connie Kim has more.
With an aim of easing tensions over the Ukraine crisis, Russia has agreed to meet with NATO on Wednesday in Brussels. It'll be the first public contact between Moscow and the military alliance since Russian forces moved into Ukraine's Crimean peninsula. Further south in Europe on Wednesday in Paris, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold talks for the first time since the unrest in Ukraine erupted. The two will be meeting on the sidelines of a special conference that aims to help Lebanon cope with the influx of Syrian refugees. Before traveling to France, Kerry stopped in Kiev in a show of support for the country's interim government. Afterward, Kerry slammed Russia's deployment of troops to Crimea as an act of aggression, but added that the U.S. is not looking for a confrontation.
In the streets today, I didn't see anybody who feels threatened, except for the potential of an invasion by Russia. So I would hope that President Putin, who is insisting against all evidence everywhere in the world about troops being in Crimea, that they're not there, that he will step back and listen carefully, that we would like to see this de-escalated.
During his short trip to Kiev, Kerry offered an economic and technical loan package worth $1 billion to help Ukraine's new government. The United States also plans to send technical advisors to Ukraine to get the country's economy back on track. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Defense Ministry confirmed that it had successfully test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile Tuesday. Although the test was planned before the current crisis in Ukraine and the U.S. was notified beforehand, it adds to the undercurrent of tensions between Russia and the West. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
For a closer look into the crisis in Ukraine, we are joined live in the studio by Professor Elena Shehel, Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the Hankuk University for Foreign Studies.
Professor Shehel, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let's start with the big question, why? Why is Russia and Putin so obsessed with maintaining a tight grip on Crimea?
Well, first of all, let's not forget that there is a Russian Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, and Russia will not give that up. Russia does not have a favorable access to oceans, and for example, the Northern Fleet is locked in the ice from November to June and only has one ice-free port, which is at Murmansk. Also, the Baltic Fleet is in the Kaliningrad Oblast, which is not even congruous with the other territory of Russian Federation, and this is the only ice-free naval outlet of Russia into the Baltic Sea. Also, the Pacific Fleet is 4,000 miles away from Moscow, and it is not easily accessed by land from Western Russia. So if Putin gets access and gets hold over Crimea, Russia could get access to the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean, and it would not have to negotiate with Ukraine about its presence on the peninsula. Secondly, let us not forget that there are substantial deposits of gas near the Crimean Black Sea coast, and Ukraine plans to start to develop those deposits. This leads us to the third reason, being that Ukraine is important to Russia geopolitically, and it is crucial for Russia to have Ukraine under its influence. And since pro-Russian President Yanukovych was ousted from office, Ukraine has an opportunity to secure and to have control over its own source of gas. and this will greatly weaken Russia's influence over Ukraine. And I think these are the three key points of why Russian troops are in Crimea today. And also, let us not forget that the domestic environment in Russia is far from favorable. For example, the Russian economy is highly dependent on gas and oil exports, and corruption is rampant, bureaucracy continues to be inefficient, and on the other hand, democracy, freedom of speech, other civil rights are being increasingly suppressed, and with protests and basically any type of opposition being quelled in Russia, it urgently needs a major distraction, and I think it has found this distraction in Ukrainian crisis.
So basically, Russia tries to find an economic interest in Crimea, as well as a way to divert the attention, domestic public attention, from the internal politics.
Yes.
Now, the U.S. and other Western nations have threatened Russia and President Putin that they will hit them with sanctions and international isolation should Russia continue to make progress into Crimea. But is it not true that the West has just limited things to do to sanction Russia?
Well, that's true. It looks like the U.S. and European Union have little they can put up against Russian aggression. But I think that short of military intervention, which is of course not really an option, but as for non-military action, I think Putin has long ago stopped caring about what other countries have to say about him. And unfortunately, public statements of Western leaders expressing their concern and disapproval have had little to no impact on to Putin. And the warnings of West of exclusion from the G8 or economic sanctions or visa denials or freezing of Russian bank accounts, I think they might be not enough to stop Russia alone. But when these measures are put together, it quite may be persuasive enough to stop Russia from its aggression into Ukraine. As a Ukrainian, I'm hoping that the world community agrees to impose this mechanism as soon as possible. And I think that Putin is a man of action, not just words. And likewise, I think he would react more favorably if more actions, such as those I mentioned right now, were to be implemented by the world community. And I think that Crimean conflict impact on the Russian economy has the potential to be enormous. And together with international sanctions, that these efforts might convince Putin to re-evaluate his plan to invade Ukraine.
Well, the man of action is, let's hope this will not escalate into a new Cold War frontier between U.S. and Russia over Crimea. Well, thank you so much, Professor Sehel, for making time for us. We look forward to having you back here again someday soon.
Thank you.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Moving over to other parts of our world, China opened its annual National People's Congress on Wednesday morning. Their military budget was given a boost and the economic growth target was retained. Our Shin Se-min has more.
China has unveiled its master plan for the year, and it includes a bigger military budget and a stable economic growth target. The figures were announced on Wednesday, the first day of an annual legislative session of the National People's Congress. Beijing will boost its military defense budget by 12.2% to about $131 billion. That percentage is greater than that of total government expenditure, which will rise 9.5% this year. The fatter defense budget comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping seeks to create a stronger military amid heightened tensions in the East Asian region. With regard to economic growth, last year's target of 7.5% was retained. The world's second-largest economy grew 7.7% last year, its worst rate of growth since 1999. The 7.5% target for this year might make it difficult to achieve Beijing's goal of curbing credit risks and solving the nation's pollution problem. But Premier Lee Kang-chang said smog would be the priority, describing the issue as a red light warning against inefficiency. The full session of the Congress will run for a total of 9 days, during which corruption, pollution, and regional issues will be addressed. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, we have some positive numbers on the nation's economic front. Korea's shipbuilding industry solidified its smooth start to the year, logging the most global orders in February for the second consecutive month. UK-based Clarkson Research Service said Wednesday that Korea shipbuilders won orders accounting for nearly 1.4 million compensated gross tons last month, up 20% from the same month last year. Well, with that, Korean shipbuilders now control roughly 45% of the global market. The pickup is attributed to Korean shipbuilding companies winning more contracts for larger, more expensive ships, such as container vessels and LNG-fueled ships.
More numbers from Korea. Korea's household savings grew at their slowest pace in 6 years in 2013. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday the amount of household deposits at banks came to roughly $470 billion at the end of last year. That's up 6.6% from the previous year. Of that, the amount of savings deposits stood at around $430 billion, up 5.5% from a year earlier, the slowest pace in 6 years. Demand deposits, which can be withdrawn anytime, grew at their fastest pace in 12 years, jumping 20% in the same period to roughly $40 billion. Household credit came to $955 billion at the end of 2013, up 6% from a year earlier.
You know, we were blessed with some warm weather for the past few days, but it feels like winter has now returned. Well, let's get a check on the weather forecast with our Michelle Park at the Weather Center for details. Michelle.
Good evening. Right now, the snow is coming down fast on the East Coast, and on the other extreme, a dry weather warning is now in effect for other regions.
Well, hope springs eternal for those who are hoping that spring gets to us a little bit sooner.
And we are expecting this cold weather to continue throughout the week. However, it will be getting warmer by the weekend. And tomorrow it's going to be generally cloudy with heavy snowfall in the central region. And temperatures are likely to drop even more with highs coming at 8 degrees. So please be prepared. Now going over to our readings. Seoul drops -4 degrees in the morning and gets up to 6 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will get up to 8 and 9 degrees respectively. Now down onto Jeju Island, it's going to be windy and cloudy at 8 degrees. Dokdo makes it up to 2, while Bangkokgang drops down to -1. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Well, thank you very much for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Meanwhile, tune in for our 8 p.m. newscast for Foreign Minister Byung-se's address to the United Nations on Japan's military sexual slavery. Good night.